Fora TV. The world is thinking.
Infidel, you know, your autobiography, your memoir bears eloquent and shocking testimony to the brutality of the circumstances of your upbringing, what you had to put up with, and it paints Islam in a very, very bad light. But you've been at pains to emphasize, I've noticed in previous interviews, that your movement away from Islam was not a response to that brutality, as it were, to the revulsion that you felt at that. It was an intellectual decision. It was something that you'd worked out as intellectually the right thing. Perhaps you could tell us, if I understand that correctly, perhaps you could tell us something about what you mean by that.
I think when you're in the middle of brutality, and when you're born into it, when you experience it, and when you're in a world where it's not only about brutality, you know, people get killed. My grandmother believed in evil spirits. She had us gently mutilated and all that, but she was also a very loving, dear woman. Mm-hmm. And I understood that. So the terms of brutality, extremism, and so on, that didn't exist in my vocabulary before I came. But when you get, unlike my grandmother, unlike my mother, unlike a lot of people I know, when you get access to a lot of education, mental and especially intellectual stimulation, you get to really get in touch with your reason, then you no longer have an excuse to say, you know what, I'm going to... My grandmother has the excuse and the bliss which ignorance brings. Right. I don't have that excuse. So when on the 11th of September, bin Laden made a plea and said, if you are a true Muslim, stand up. Islam is being attacked. You have to stand up and defeat it. After having gone to university, after having taken account of the alternative, I no longer had a reason to say, you know what, I'm just going to put my head in the sand. He is right. I'm going to follow him, or I'm going to go into a paralysis of denial, or I'm going to make all sorts of excuses. When I opened the Quran and I saw his citations and I put it to what the Quran said and the hadith and so on, I was like, yeah, I can't agree with this, and I don't want to agree with it. I think it's inhuman. That put me immediately on a mental discord with myself, with my upbringing, with my religion, that I was an infidel, and I had to deal with that. And I only want to tell everyone, it's not easy.
I'm sure it isn't. It must be horrendously difficult. But let me just press on that a little further. I mean, do I understand this correctly? Was 9/11 the incident, bin Laden's remarks, that made you realize you were no longer a Muslim? Would that not be the correct way of putting it?
Well, I think in Holland we always say the drop that made, you know, een drop op een gloeiende plaat.
Right, the straw that broke the camel's back.
Yeah, the straw, that sort of thing, yeah. But what happened on the 11th of September was so huge that I can hardly call it a drop. But if I consider my life between 1992, when I ran away from the arranged marriage, to the 11th of September, I can say I didn't really lead a very religious life. I started to avoid religious people. I took off my headscarf, I took off my hijab. I also took off my mental and intellectual headscarf. I would read the books that we were required to read for political theory. I'm looking at some Harris. And I would just pretend, I would just tell myself, you know what, if I read on, I know I'm sinning. So, you know, I'd say, you know, God, I'm only reading this just to get my marks. I don't really believe in this.
Okay.
But then I will read on because I was very curious about it. Then I would go out with my friends. I had a boyfriend. I would drink wine. I would do all these things.
Right. But you were still saying you were a Muslim if anybody asked.
Oh, not only that. I was extremely defensive. There's a guy called Joris Luijendijk, who's the correspondent for one of the very prestigious papers in the Netherlands, and he had written a book, and which he said, if you're a good Muslim, you give a tick to your wife. And he had a quotation from the Quran, and I was furious. I was like, how on earth can he say this? Mm-hmm. And it had to do with him being a non-Muslim, reading the Quran and actually understanding it. It had to do with the cognitive dissonance of being told exactly, being confronted with what was in there. But I had accomplished all the mechanisms of remaining a Muslim and not leading the life of a Muslim person.
I see.